Hey everyone, I'm Josh,
I'm Attila.
and we're here to talk to you guys today about the birth control sponge.
Now you may be asking yourself, wow, they used to use a sponge as a form of birth control? Well, yes, they actually did. Back in 1983, the sponge actually hit the market and was a popular form of birth control or contraception up until about 1995 when it was voluntarily removed from the market by its manufacturer. They were a little too cheap and didn't want to comply with FDA manufacturing regulations, so they just voluntarily took it off the market.
So I know you're wondering, Attila, Josh, what is the birth control sponge? Well, I'll tell you. The birth control sponge is a soft, round piece of foam. Now this is not a birth control sponge. It's a stress star. However, because we weren't able to obtain a birth control sponge, we're using this as a visual aid.
We went around, we called around. Josh called the Sumner County Health Department. I called the Bibb County Health Department, as well as a couple OB friends of mine in Macon. And unfortunately, they didn't have any samples for us to use for educational purpose or to demonstrate with, as they're not really sampled by the company anymore. And it is an over-the-counter form of contraception. We then called CVS and Walmart's. And unfortunately, they didn't have any of the Today sponges available for us, but we could order it to get it in. So, in the place of the Today sponge, the Stress Star. For educational purposes only, of course.
So as I was saying, it's a small, round piece of foam, and it's filled with a sperm-killing chemical, a spermicide. And basically, the sponge is inserted into the vagina before sexual intercourse, and it's used as a sort of barrier method of birth control. Now, the sponge is typically about 2 inches in diameter, or about 5.5 centimeters. And the only brand in the US is called the Today sponge.
And you just may be asking yourself, Josh, Attila, how does this sponge work? Well, let's show you. The birth control sponge covers the cervix and blocks the sperm from going into the uterus and reaching an egg or an ovum. The cervix, as we know, is the opening of the uterus into the vagina. And as Dr. Pai told us about earlier in lecture, the actual fertilization of the egg actually happens in the fallopian tube. So this stops all that from happening. And it's also enhanced by having a little extra spermicide in the sponge that actually will kill the sperm. Now, we're going to show you a little lighthearted look at the sponge from a great show called Seinfeld that your elder statesmen like Josh and I fondly remember. It's probably our instructors do as well. So for you youngins, sit back, relax, and see if Elaine's date truly is sponge-worthy.
Can I help you?
Yeah, do you have any Today sponges? I know they're off the market, but
Actually, we have a case left.
A case? A case of sponges? I mean, a case. Huh. How many come in a case?
60.
60. Well, I'll take 3.
3.
Yeah, well, make it 10.
10.
20 sponges should be plenty.
You say 20?
Yeah, 25 sponges is just fine.
25.
Yeah,
You said with 25.
yeah. Just give me the whole case, I'll be on my way. I didn't even use one.
I thought you said it was imminent.
Yeah, it was, but then I just couldn't decide if he was really sponge-worthy.
Sponge-worthy?
Yeah, Jerry, I have to conserve these sponges.
But you like this guy. Isn't that what the sponges are for?
Yes, before they went off the market. But I mean, now I've got to reevaluate my whole screening process. I can't afford to waste any of them. So you think you're sponge-worthy?
Yes, I think I'm sponge-worthy. I think I'm very sponge-worthy.
Run down your case for me again.
Well, we've gone out several times. We obviously have a good rapport. I own a very profitable electronics distributing firm. I eat well. I exercise. Blood tests, immaculate. And if I can speak frankly, I'm actually quite good at it.
You gonna do something about your sideburns?
Yeah, I
there?
told you. I'm gonna trim my sideburns.
And the bathroom in your apartment?
Cleaned it this morning.
The sink, the tub, everything got cleaned?
Everything, yeah. It's spotless.
All right, let's go.
Sponge-worthy. What a classic.
Absolutely, absolutely, Josh. For the rest of our classmates, make sure you go back and check out the other episodes of Seinfeld for some good comedic laughter while you're needing a break from all the studying we're doing. But let's get back to more serious matters at hand and talk about the sponge.
So, I know you're thinking to yourselves, how do I use the sponge? Well, lucky for you, we've got step-by-step instruction that can help give you a basic idea. So when you're inserting the sponge, you want to make sure first that you have clean hands. And with your clean hands, make sure you remove the sponge from the package. Hold the sponge in one hand with the dimple or concave side facing up and the loop dangling down. Wet the sponge thoroughly with clean tap water. Gently squeeze the sponge until you see suds. This activates the spermicide and makes it easier to insert the sponge. With the dimple side facing up and the nylon loop hanging down, fold the sudsy sponge in half and insert it as far back into the vagina as you can reach. Now, clearly we can't demonstrate that.
It's not anatomically possible.
But we'll continue. After it is inserted, slide your finger around the edge of the sponge and check that it is covering the cervix. You should also be able to feel the loop at the bottom of the sponge. Now, some quick tips. You don't want to keep the sponge in the vagina more than about 30 hours. But during this time, you can have intercourse again without replacing the sponge or adding more spermicide. However, don't reuse your sponges. If a sponge accidentally falls out, throw it away. Get a new sponge. Finally, don't use any other medicines for your vagina, such as douches or vaginal yeast infection creams, at least while the sponge is in the vagina.
Oh, Josh, those are some really great insertion methods that you just talked about. Now, I'm going to cover some of the removal of the sponge. And we're going to go over a couple of quick steps with you now. And first and foremost, you want to wait at least 6 hours after intercourse before removing the sponge. Next, you want to wash your hands with soap and water. Third, relax. Put a finger into your vagina and reach upward to find the nylon loop. Grasp the string or the sponge with your fingers and slowly and gently pull the sponge out from your vagina. If it seems stuck, wait a few minutes. Then try again. If it is still hard to get the sponge out, tighten your vaginal muscles and hold for 10 seconds. Then relax and let go. Repeat. While relaxing, breathe out slowly. Then try to remove the sponge again. Next, you want to discard the sponge in a waste container. Do not put it in the toilet. Finally, if you're having trouble removing the sponge or it breaks upon removal, make sure to contact your healthcare provider as soon as possible. And finally, you want to store your sponges at room temperature. You want to keep the container tightly closed, protect the sponges from heat, high humidity, and from direct bright sunlight. And those are the removal steps of the sponge.
So now we're going to go over a couple of the benefits and disadvantages of using the sponge birth control method. For starters, the birth control method is about 68 to 91% effective. Now, it works better to prevent pregnancy if you have never given birth and if your partner is also using a latex condom during intercourse. Now, I bet you're thinking 68 to 91%. That's a pretty wide window of opportunity. Let's keep in mind, as I stated before, it's more effective at preventing pregnancy for women who have never given birth. So for nulliparous women, you're going to be more on the 91% side of effectiveness. However, if you're multiparous or you've had multiple births, then you're going to be more on the 68% side of effectiveness. so you may want to consider an alternative form of birth control. Also, with the birth control sponge, there are practically no side effects. It is a very safe method of birth control. You also don't need to have a healthcare provider write a prescription to get the birth control sponge.
OTC.
You can buy it right over the counter at any pharmacy or grocery store. Sponges also give immediate protection against pregnancy, when used properly, of course. Hormonal methods of birth control, such as the birth control pill, don't protect against pregnancy until after being used for at least one full menstrual cycle. So, with the sponge, you're one and done. The sponges don't affect a woman's natural hormones. Also, another positive. Using this method of birth control does not have to interrupt lovemaking, because the sponge can be put into the vagina up to 24 hours before sex. While the sponge is in the vagina, you can have sex more than once during a 24-hour period without adding more spermicide. So if you're getting ready for a hot date, you just pop one of these suckers in, you're good to go.
Convenience, convenience, convenience.
Now the sponge can also be carried in a purse or pocket, and they're very disposable, so you can take them anywhere you want to go. And finally, sponges can be used during breastfeeding. Very safe.
Yes. Josh, those are some really great advantages that you just informed our audience about. Now, I'm going to cover some of the disadvantages of using the sponge. You may be asking, wow, there are disadvantages to the sponge? Yes, there are. First, they are not as effective in preventing pregnancy as some other forms of birth control. This is especially true. They're used without any other form of birth control, such as a condom, during intercourse. Sponges are a fairly costly method of birth control. They also may be rarely uncomfortable for one or both partners. They may cause some drying of the vagina. It takes practice to get comfortable using, whether inserting or removing a sponge. Sponges should not be used during menstrual periods. Some women have adverse reactions to the spermicide, such as a rash, itching, or irritation after using the sponge. If you or your partner get burning, itching, or a rash, or other irritation of the vagina or penis, use a different method of birth control and contact your healthcare provider. The sponge also does not protect against sexually transmitted diseases such as HIV, AIDS, chlamydia, or gonorrhea. The spermicide may irritate the skin around the vagina, penis, or rectum. This may increase your risk of getting HIV/AIDS if your partner is infected. And before using this form of birth control, talk with your healthcare provider if you have ever had an allergic reaction to any medicine, toxic shock syndrome, or any vaginal or uterine problems. Also, talk to your provider about using this form of birth control if you have ever given birth or had an abortion or miscarriage less than 6 weeks prior.
Now we're going to show you guys a quick clip we found of a woman named Dr. Thyler, or Thieler,
Tomato.
whichever you prefer. And she kind of goes over the basics of using the birth control sponge, and she actually has one with her and uses it to demonstrate with, so you'll get an opportunity to see what one actually looks like.
Let's watch now.
So this is the Today Sponge. The Today Sponge may or may not be available where you shop because it was off the market for a little while and there's talk of it coming back. So it has some spermicide embedded in it, and you squeeze it, put it up high in the vagina, and it sits up against your cervix, and it acts as a barrier, and it kills sperm.
Okay, because that's the spermicide in it.
Yeah. The beauty of the Today Sponge is you can put it in before you go out on your date, and you leave it in there for up to 24 hours.
How effective are these types of methods when used with spermicide?
These methods with spermicide are about 2.5-star methods.
Thank you, Dr. Thyler, for that great update. And guys and gals, we really appreciate you taking time to watch our video. We hope you found it informative and educational and brought you in a little lighthearted, fun manner. And as always,
When using your birth control sponge, keep it classy, GSW.